Hi, and welcome to the Carnivore Stories podcast with me, Alyssa Grubner. The carnivore way of eating has completely transformed my life, and it's stories just like the ones you'll hear on this podcast that kept me going strong every step of the way. I hope you're ready to hear an inspirational carnivore story. I know I am, so let's get into it. All right, this is episode 10 of the Carnivore Stories podcast, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Michelle Hurn. She is a registered dietitian, an ultra runner, and the author of The Dietitian's Dilemma. This is a great book. You can find it on Amazon. You can find Michelle on Instagram at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat, and she's on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. Tell everyone about your background before coming to carnivore, the way you eat now, your lifestyle and your background.
Yeah. So, my health story really begins when I was 12 years old. I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was about 5 feet tall and 57 and a half pounds. So very, very kind of a dire situation. Heart failing, kidneys failing, ended up going to inpatient treatment. Immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And at that point, during treatment, I did become weight restored. But I was just told, you're probably going to deal with this your whole life. You're going to have racing thoughts around food. You're going to deal with anxiety. And so I just figured oh no, I'm going to have to become this high functioning person with an eating disorder. And, I went through high school and college. I started running in high school but I always, struggled with food. I struggled with anxiety. And I thought if I could become a dietitian, maybe I could learn more about food. And I knew it was important. I knew it was powerful. Obviously it saved my life. But when I got into the dietetic internship, there were just things that didn't make sense. And for example, I would be with my teacher, my preceptor, and we would go into a room with somebody with type 2 diabetes. And she would say, okay, we're going to teach them, to eat carbohydrates throughout the day, 75 grams at breakfast, 75 at lunch, 75 at dinner. And I would just ask questions. I would be like, actually, isn't their blood sugar high? Shouldn't we encourage them to eat less carbohydrates? Oh, no. Everybody needs carbohydrates. Traditional dietitians, we're taught that, you must, every single disease state, whether it's kidney failure, heart disease, you need all these quote unquote healthy whole grains, lots of fruits and vegetables, but you're new, right? You're a student. So, and then I remember when we went to the ICU and, I just flipped over the tube feeding and I was like, oh my gosh, these are the same ingredients that I was fed as a 12-year-old. The number one ingredients for tube feeding formulas. If you have a loved one in a car accident, maybe has a small bowel obstruction that needs to be tube fed, the ingredients are, corn syrup, maltodextrin, canola oil, and soy protein. So, and I, like I said, I would just ask, is this the best way to feed somebody who's been in a traumatic car accident or has cancer? And I was just told, it's all about calories in, calories out, getting enough protein, doesn't matter where it comes from. And so, unfortunately, when I became a dietitian, I kind of saw a revolving door of sickness. Patients would come in with type 2 diabetes. A few months later, it's worse. They have a wound that's not healing. Their teeth are rotting. They're, starting to have dementia, going kidney failure. And it starts to kind of break you. You start to think is this what I signed up for? Giving this advice, nobody is really getting better. And then in the hospital setting, we're often told that, it's not the guidelines that are the problem. It's the fact that the patients aren't actually following them. It's the patient's fault. If they would just eat less, they just eat too much and they don't exercise enough. And they would just eat more fruits and vegetables. And, it's hard because, especially when you're young, you're like, okay, well, it must be their fault. It's not our fault. And then you add that on top of the system, as a dietitian, I would often have this huge load of patients that you have to see, and you have a small window of time, and then every single person you're going to see, you have to chart on. And so it's a big mess. So that was kind of like my introduction to just the kind of the world of dietetics. But at the same time, I was training. It was my goal to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. And I wanted to run under 2 hours and 48 minutes. And at that time, I'd run, my fastest had been 2 hours and 54 minutes. And so I was following a high carbohydrate diet because I was sure that was the best way to fuel my running, and it just all of a sudden, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, that's what you're told. I mean, certainly every runner must have to have all these carbohydrates. And so, yeah, I was training really hard, and all of a sudden my body just stopped recovering well. I noticed that runs that used to feel easy, my legs felt like lead. I was getting really, really cold sweats. And at the same time, my anxiety got worse. I started to have like panic attacks, which I hadn't had in years. And so, of course, I reached out to a few dietitians. I went to see my family doctor, and nothing was wrong. All my blood tests came back fine. And all my dietitian friends just said like, oh, you must need to eat more carbohydrates, and at that time I was eating 350 to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day. And, so I was like, okay, you want me to eat more carbohydrates. All right. So, yeah. But I was all in, I was like, let's do this. That's what I need to do. That's what I'm going to do. And as you can imagine, like things went from bad to like worse. Like I was getting cold sweats, and then kind of the like come to Jesus moment was, I was literally, wasn't able to run because I was getting those cold sweats. I went to the hospital to work, and we just had a difficult patient day. I had a patient pass away that I had been seeing, came home, fell asleep on the couch, and then woke up at like 2 a.m. And it just felt like my body was on fire. Like everything hurt. My muscles hurt. I had a headache. And I just had this moment where I just stood there and I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm out of ideas. I'd taken over-the-counter pain relievers. I'd taken stronger stuff. I tried alcohol. I tried all kinds of stuff. And so standing there in the kitchen at 2 a.m, I'm like, all right, I got to get some ice. So I drove to the local gas station and got 30 pounds of ice, put it in the bathtub. And so I'm just sitting in this ice bath trying to like cool my body off. And I'm crying. And that's when my wife came in and was just like, hey, you know what? Maybe it's time to do something different. And I was just like, yes, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to run anymore. And I just thought like my body's shot. Like I'm too old. I was 36 at the time. And I remember thinking like, you know what, if I'm not going to run, why don't I lower my carb intake? Like I intuitively knew, and, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but I intuitively knew that carbohydrates did not make me feel good. But I was just told like, oh, you have to have them. I was afraid I'd run out of energy, and certainly as an athlete. And so I decided I would follow a ketogenic diet. That was my goal. I was like, you know what, if I go ketogenic, it'll be very low carb. And as I was researching ketogenic diets, I stumbled on the carnivore diet. And like many people, I remember thinking like, oh, well, like I can get behind meat. I grew up in Texas. We ate meat growing up. But I was like, all meat, like that seems very odd. But this is what I would encourage anybody to do. I think sometimes we'll see something and we'll just, that's stupid. But I saw people online and I was like, they look really healthy and happy. I'm not healthy and happy. And so, I reached out to a couple of people, Carnivore Yogi, Sarah Kleiner, a Dave Fox, the Bot Carnivore, and just asked a few basic questions. Said, hey, you know what? I'm struggling. Like, you're happy, I'm not happy. And they were both great. They were both very generous with, just giving me some basic, what they do, their story. And so I remember getting excited. I told my wife, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try carnivore for 30 days. And she was not having it. She was like, no, this is eating disorder. This will only set you back. And I understand that mentality, right? I get it because, we have this kind of thing in society where you can't ask somebody who's had a disordered relationship with food to eliminate certain food groups. And so, but when we'll get to that, but I can't even tell you why exactly, but I just felt intuitively like, I want to give this a try, And it was funny. My wife and I thought about that. She was like, all right, you're going to quit. This is not going to work. And in the first week was hard. I was going from very high carbohydrate diet to a almost zero, carbohydrates. And knowing what I know now, I think the transition could have been easier. I wasn't taking electrolytes. I wasn't using a lot of salt, had terrible headaches. But after that first week, I noticed that I no longer, my body didn't hurt. And I just kind of thought like, well, you know what? I'm not running at all anymore. That must be why. But then I also noticed like I wasn't really hungry throughout the day. Like I felt much more satiated and calm. And then kind of the really big moment was, it was about the third week. I came home from work and my wife was like literally just sitting on the couch waiting for me. And she's like, I need to talk to you. Oh no, like what I do, like, okay. And she said, yeah, I gotta tell you, like, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet. She said, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you, within 3 weeks. And so we both just kind of like stared at each other and we're like, we have to figure this out. Like, if this is real and this is true, then because we're both science-minded people. Like, she's a scientist, And so I, at the time, worked at a hospital. So I had access to clinical trials. And that is probably the first time in my dietetic career that I became very angry, because I kept going through trial after trial after trial of specifically diabetes and low carb. I'm like, we have all this evidence nobody taught me about. Why are we giving diabetics carbs? And of course, naively, I thought I'll print all this out. I'll write a summary. I'll go to our, clinical director and I'll change the hospital system. I originally thought that I could take my newfound knowledge and I could advocate for low carb. But of course I was, immediately told like, you're not going to be able to practice that here. So crazy stuff.
Wow. Wow. So are you still working in that type of setting, or have you started like an independent practice?
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy. I at that time, I had just started working at a new place in Portland, and I was actually supposed to get my entire own floor. And that was supposed to happen April of 2020. Well, then March of 2020 rolls around and we start hearing about this thing called the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously all of a sudden we had no elective surgeries. I lost all my hours. I was put into the employee call center. Oh, don't worry, Michelle. We don't have any patients for you to see, but we're going to keep you on staff. You're just going to be in the call center. Like, okay, well, what is that? Well, for 8 hours a day, your patients on heart healthy diets and diabetic diets are going to call in and order chocolate cake and pasta and rice. And you don't do any nutrition counseling. You just enter it in the computer.
Oh, no.
And I was just like, this is killing my soul. And so at that point, I decided that I would no longer be in the hospital. The minute I could leave, I was going to leave, and I have people reach out to me often and say like, what do I do? I'm in this situation. For me at that point, it wasn't financially feasible to leave, but I was like, as soon as I can, I'm out of here. So every free moment I had though, I started writing the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, because I started looking at the evidence, because as a dietitian, we're just taught like, oh, you can't reverse type 2 diabetes, or, oh, sarcopenia. Everybody that gets older just has muscle wasting. And the more, I saw anecdotal cases of these people that had these diseases that were reversing them. And then I saw evidence. I actually saw clinical trials. And now, we have several. They just came out with a study with people with major bipolar disorder, depression. 43% of people went into remission on a ketogenic diet, so it's just like all these things that I had seen that I was just told, like, we heavily medicate people and we just feed them the standard American diet and, oh, they're not getting better. I wanted to get the conversation going. I wanted people to understand how powerful the human body is when it comes to healing. The human body's capacity to heal is greater than anyone is allowed us to believe. It is phenomenal. But in order to do that, we have to start feeding it in a certain way. We have to start eating certain foods, and we really have to start removing certain foods. If we started there, our world would change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I was thinking about going carnivore And my husband was like, well, Alyssa, you're coming from one really restrictive diet, which I was on a very restrictive diet, counting every little thing I was putting in my mouth and, and just miserable doing that. And he was thinking, carnivore I was just going to be, oh, I want cake and cookies and I can't have it because I'm just eating meat. But it's been completely the opposite. I don't want those things. I don't think about them, and especially seeing the health benefits that comes from eating this way. It's a whole new world. It's restrictive in that you're eliminating some things, but you're eliminating the things that you don't need that are making you sick.
Yes. I mean, in my opinion, food should be something that you eat and then you move on. We have created a society where if you don't eat sugars and pastas and cakes, like, you have a problem. What's wrong with you? You're missing out on life, but like, what has been given back to me in my life since I really have changed how I have eaten is amazing. I could not run. I was anxious. I was hurting. I was sore with my partner. I was depressed, and now my life is full of joy. I was able to start running again to the point that I could run ultra marathons. Like, I no longer run 26 miles. My last race was 62 miles. I'm able to run and compete.
Goodness.
And at a high level, and so for me, by starting, I did a full 30 days in the carnivore, just meat and fat. And like, I also feel like it kind of healed a lot of those obsessive thoughts, because for the first time I was providing my brain with enough saturated fat and enough, not only people think meat is just protein. It's like, no, it's so much more. It's one of the most bioavailable foods, meaning your body can actually use and absorb it. It has tons of B12 and folic acid and carnitine, taurine, all these different things that your body needs to function properly, right? So for me, that was very powerful. And then certainly, as a long distance runner, I do now consume some carbohydrates, but they're a relatively small part of my overall diet, right? So I feel, and I counsel people now, I do one-on-one consults. Most people who are metabolically healthy are able to tolerate small amounts of carbohydrates. But we just had a study, about 7% of the US is metabolically healthy. So most people are not. Most people have, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, kidney failure, high blood pressure. And so when you just take a step back and you're able to, fuel your body in a way that not only balances blood sugar, but you're also flooding your body with all the things, all the vitamins and minerals it needs, it can finally heal.
Absolutely. Okay, so as an ultra runner, what all do you include in your diet? And you said there's some carbohydrates.
Yeah.
What are you eating?
I eat a lot of beef. It's kind of funny. I feel like we get a cow share, or often you'll go to the farmer's market and just load up. There's a Windy Rivers farm. We're on a first name basis, me and Will. So most days I consume between a pound and a half to 2 pounds of ground beef a day. But certainly around, usually after I run, and then in the evenings, I'll have between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrates total. And so my carbohydrates, and I always tell people, like, athletes or people who are including carbohydrates in your diet, like, I encourage you to make it something you enjoy and something your system tolerates, and that's a little bit unique. For example, like, my wife is very sensitive to nightshades, like no potatoes, no peppers or whatever, where somebody else might eat those and be totally fine. But for me personally, I use, especially like right now, I live in the Pacific Northwest. So like berries are really big in the summer. So I'll do some blueberries, some strawberries. We do a long fermented sourdough bread, which I find is really good for me, just because it's very compact. If I'm going to try to get 100 grams of carbs, I don't really want to have like 5 or 6 cups of berries. I don't know how my GI system would do with that. So those are probably.
Are you making the bread yourself?
We do. It's quite the process. It has to
that is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's super cool. I a few years ago, I got really into sourdough and I was making a lot of that. And then I let my I named her Gertie. I let her die.
Oh,
So
Gertie, your starter died. No,
yeah.
that's funny.
Yeah, but my daughter, she's been getting interested in it, and so I said, well, maybe we can do that as a school project because she's homeschooled, so that might be a cool thing for her to learn.
Yeah, I found too that the more you're involved with your food, like the more it just feels very good. And for someone like myself that had a history of an eating disorder, it's been very healing to like when we bought a cow share, we'd get tons of different pieces, and there were some cuts that were really big, that were tougher. So I would, we have a small grinder we got
Mhm.
on Amazon. I would cut them up and I would add fat. And I'm like, I felt much more connected to my food, where I feel like as a society, we're really not. Like most people have never seen a cow be butchered, have never hunted, have never fished, have never
Mhm.
gardened. And those are very powerful things to do. And if you are not able to do any of those things, like maybe, if you are able to support the people who do, like if you can purchase things from a farmer's market or a local gardener, I think that those are really good ways to, one, not only ensure you're getting probably a higher quality, less GMO, whatever foods,
Mhm.
but also I just found for
Yeah.
me, it's just, it just feels really good. There's something, I don't want to say spiritual about it, but it just feels like you're kind of connecting with your food.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay, circling back around to running just a little bit. I
Of
want to
course.
know what's it like when you're doing one of these super long races. I'm not really familiar, or I'm a little bit familiar with the running world. I know that people will use like goos to keep them going, or applesauce, or
Mhm.
they might have stations along the race. What are do you bring anything along with you, or what are you eating while you're running all these
Yeah.
miles?
No, that's a great question because, whether you're a high carbohydrate or low carbohydrate athlete, like the goal is always to defend muscle glycogen because, what that means is, we don't run out of stored body fat. Like even super lean people, like the, 5, 6% lean Kenyan runners have up to 100,000 calories of body fat. What we run out of is stored carbohydrates because, the
Mhm.
faster you go, the more you're kind of like, riding that line, you're going to burn through your muscle glycogen. So the goal for me as a low carbohydrate athlete, I want to teach my body to be able to burn as much fat for fuel, even at faster paces. Because if you're a very high carbohydrate athlete, for example, you might be burning 70 to 80% carbohydrate at race pace. Where for me, I might be burning only 30% carbohydrate. So we both are going to make sure we're replenishing carbohydrate. But guess what? I need to eat a lot less carbs than you. And why is that
Mhm.
potentially advantageous? Because if I'm running, my last race took 10 hours. So if you're going to have to eat 3 or 4 gels every hour, there was a study that about 60% of people in ultra races dropped out due to GI issues. Like just, their bodies can't handle that much sugar. And so, my goal is always like, I want to be able to give my body enough carbohydrates, but never so much that your gut goes nuts. And so, yeah. And,
Mhm.
that always, just like anything else, that can be very individual. I've coached people who say, yeah, I do 1 gel an hour and I'm totally good. Like, awesome. Some people will just do whole foods, whether that's, like you said, applesauce. There's a company that I've done some work with called S Fuels, and it is just like a cyclic dextrin. So just a carbohydrate with some electrolytes. I've used that. I tend to use some type of liquid and some type of solid. I've used rice, and that seems to settle pretty well in my stomach. My first race, I used a little bit of the sourdough. But yeah, I found that I'm pretty good with about 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrates an hour, which is certainly on the lower side for most endurance athletes.
Mhm.
Like I said, they can go up to 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates an hour. Yeah. And and that also makes it easier for me to keep going. If I'm trying to win these races, I'm not camping at the aid stations. And that's not saying, I mean, some people, if you're running an ultra, you're an amazing person. But I remember my first ultra, I just coming from the marathon world where nobody stops at all. It was surprising to see people just like sitting at the aid station, having a sandwich, hanging out.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah. So my goal is always to be able to, if you hit an aid station, you might be switching out your water bottle, electrolyte, and go. So yeah. So
Okay.
rice, S fuels. What else have I used? Those are the kind of the main, and then some sourdough. But yeah, I mean, like I said, there's no like magic carbohydrate. It's really just like figuring out about how many grams per hour you need and then getting your stomach used to that.
Cool. So after you pass the finish line and you're like, yes, I just did that. What are you splurging on? What is your carnivore meat-based splurge that you are going after that big race?
Yeah, ironically, usually after a big race, after every single race, that is way more carbohydrates than I would ever have in a single day, right? Like because you're having,
Yeah.
25 per hour, and my last race was a little rough just because the conditions were pretty bad. And so normally you just feel awful. So it's just like kind of getting home, getting some fluids, or maybe get a scoop of whey protein
Mm,
or something, and you're crashing. So it's all the ultimate irony. You've just burned God knows how many calories, and you can barely stomach anything. But after that, give yourself a day or whatever. I generally we like to go out and like celebrate. So we'll go get a nice ribeye or after my second race, we went
oh
and got
yeah.
a tomahawk. My wife and I split it. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, it's usually something like a
Awesome.
special steak. That's usually our kind of go-to celebration is any type of steak.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, me too. Lots of carnivores.
Yep.
Um, do you incorporate organs?
I do. And I do think, people go back and forth whether those are important or not. For me, for someone is causing as much micro trauma as I am. And what I mean by that is just, every time you're hit with running, you're causing just a little bit of trauma. Um, I have been a little bit concerned about iron. I was actually
Hmm.
severely anemic through most of my low or high carb days. And now I understand potentially more. I actually had to have IVs at one point. Um, but I didn't know, like nobody ever taught me. And when I was a dietitian that, fiber and phytic acid can actually bind to iron. And, I was eating so much oats, high sources of phytic acid and, whole grains, all this fiber and stuff. So, I've done two things in my life. I've removed a lot of that phytic acid and fiber, and then I eat liver. Liver is one of those things that's it's very cheap and it's just so nutrient dense. I have a couple ounces of liver
Hmm.
usually several times a week. I personally eat it frozen and raw. I mean, I've tried cooking it. I've
Hmm.
had people tell me like, "Oh, I love it. I cook it." I'm like, "Man, if you do great, you do you." For me, it becomes like a texture thing. Like I don't like it. Um, but I would always tell somebody if you choose to eat anything raw, like you really need to make sure it's from a good source. Like I would never just go to the grocery store and Walmart or something and buy raw organs. But this is from a farmer that does his butchering himself, and it's immediately frozen. So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely liver. I mean, that's a nutrition powerhouse for sure. Are you concerned at all about vitamin A toxicity? Is that something that you worry about at all?
I'm not, actually that was one of the questions on the RD exam that which one of these will cause vitamin A toxicity. A polar bear liver will, apparently. If you ever eat a polar bear liver, it has so much vitamin A
Hmm.
that would kill you immediately. Um, I do not know, and this is once again, I'm always open to, people. I'm open to being wrong. It's one of my, I would say it's one of my strengths. Is it a good idea to eat a pound or several pounds of liver every day? I don't know. I have no idea. I personally don't. But I've never wanted to either. I've never woken up and, been like, oh, let's do that. But I also know that 45% of our population cannot convert the carotenes that are in plants to an actual usable form of vitamin A. Right. So 45% of the
Hmm.
population could eat carrots and sweet potatoes and all day and never absorb any vitamin A. So I think,
Mm.
getting several ounces of liver a week is a good idea. And, if you're someone that has any skin issues, whether acne, liver could change your life for sure.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Um, okay, so as a dietitian, how do you make sense of this crazy food compass scale?
Yeah. I mean, we just made a video making fun of the food compass scale. I like to say my 7 year
Wait,
old
wait.
niece is
Did you did you ate that sugar that rice syrup concoction?
Yeah,
What
I had to
was
do it a
that
couple
like?
times because my wife messed up on we're gonna release a blooper reel, but I was like, oh, I gotta do this again. Man, it felt like someone like punched you in the face with sugar. We've done videos before where I've taken like a sip of Pepsi. And it's gnarly to me just because my diet now is so low in any type of sugar. Like I said, like some berries, here, here and there. But it was just like, whoa, it was amazing. It was almost like your taste buds were on
Hmm.
fire. I can't imagine doing that all the time, and like I'm not, people are like, oh, you ate that as poison. Like I'm metabolically healthy. I'm not worried about having a few spoonfuls of, frosted mini wheats. But
Right.
yeah, it was it was gross. It was not something that I was like, man, I want to keep doing this. Like as soon as we finished doing the take, that went in the garbage for sure. But I mean, the food compass scale it's just like the
Hmm.
nutrition guidelines. Like it's all based on corporate profit, Unfortunately, there's so much money in processed food and pharmaceuticals. And I think most people know that on kind of like a base level, but the depth of corruption would probably blow most people's minds. Like it's really, really bad. Like we have the science, we know it's bad, but we can't heal you or kill you. Because if I heal you, like if you no longer have type 2 diabetes, then you don't need elective surgery. So I lose that money. You don't need the medication. So I lose that money. You don't need the insulin. So I lose that money. You don't need to see the dietitian. So I lose that money. If I kill you, the same thing. So I have to keep you perpetually sick. I literally have to keep you sick,
Hmm.
in order to make money. It's awful. And so the food scale, though, is like, that's like a new level of awful because I feel like even very, very basic intelligence people know that's wrong. But that's not my concern because, like I said, I showed it to my
Hmm.
7 year old niece and she knows that's dumb. But those things drive policy. And why is that a problem? Because
Mm.
policy impacts what we are allowed to feed in our hospitals, to our children in our schools, to our inmates in our jails, to people in psychiatric care that cannot advocate for themselves. So while you and I can clearly be like, oh, that's stupid, nobody would follow that, it matters because it's that bigger scale. Those are the things that are funneling into what we feed, a lot of people, what we feed Meals on Wheels to our seniors. So
Hmm.
I get very angry and fired up
Yeah.
about it. It's, and just the fact that we can reverse these chronic diseases in such a short period of time. I mean, Dr. Westman has shown that we can get people off as much as 150 units of insulin in 8 days. I mean, I had patients that were diabetic for 30 years. We can completely reverse your diabetes in some cases within 2 months, So it's
Mm.
just, I'm hopeful because of people like you and, people that are advocating. I do not believe we're going to see it from the top. It's not like the government's going to be like, well, this nutrition guidelines are bullshit, because there's just too much money in it. It was Nina Teicholz who told me that every single member of Congress in the US, every single one, is sponsored by at least one pharmaceutical. Like we literally have ketogenic members in Congress. They follow keto diets, but they will never
Mm.
speak out against the nutrition guidelines because they are getting, and not, this isn't just like, oh, they gave me $1,000. This is hundreds of thousands of this is a lot of money. So what we have to do, it can be discouraging to be like, well, why does it matter? But it does because as my coach in high school used to say, like, you got to win the race you're in. If you're trying to get first, go first. If you're in 100, trying to get 100th place, go 100th place. We can win this race that we are in, like I said, by sharing our story, by advocating, because I guarantee you that Sarah Kleiner and Day Fox, when I reached out to them and said, like, hey, can you just answer some questions? I need some help. They probably did not know that I was going to take that and go on and it was literally going to change my life. Like they saved my life. And
Mhm.
so you and I, as we share our story, we might change somebody's lives and save their lives. And it's that ripple effect, right? So that's why I believe I'm
Right.
hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess because when I see these things, I'm like, oh, that's so dangerous. Because, I feel like there are going to be some people who are swayed by these things. But I do believe that in the end, good will prevail, even with all this craziness going around. But I mean, I guess the reason why I feel like it's so dangerous, because I I see myself as a moderately intelligent person. And I remember before I found carnivore, I would notice that when I had less sugar, my blood pressure was not as high. Like I would do these no sugar for 20 days things, and I would I would notice my blood sugar wasn't as high. I didn't correlate it at the time for whatever reason as, oh, obviously sugar is really bad for blood pressure. Instead, I was like, okay, well, what research can I find that sugar is bad for blood pressure? And I couldn't find anything on the web. Everything was always like, well, as long as calories are accounted for, sugar is perfectly fine. And that kept me stuck for a while. Eating sugar because I liked it and I was addicted to it. And there was nothing to say, well, absolutely, sugar is the reason why your blood pressure is high.
No, you made a good point. I'm doing a talk next month at Low Carb USA, and it's going to be about the nutrition guidelines. But the title of my presentation is Common Sense and Courage, because what we have been taught has really, for many people, myself included, has really allowed us to override not our own research, our own common sense. Like we, as a world, I was actually, before speaking with you, I was talking to two gentlemen from Poland. We basically have convinced the entire world that it is better to eat frosted mini wheats or frosted flakes for breakfast than it is to have a steak and eggs. Like it is better to have this sugary orange juice than it is to have like water. Like you said, I noticed I do better without sugar. Like I intuitively knew my anxiety was much better when I didn't eat as many carbs, but I was so sure that I had to have them because it was told to me over and over and over again. And then everywhere you go, there's sugar. You can't go anywhere, and it's only gotten worse. I literally went, I had a day, I went to Home Depot and there's Snickers bars at the checkout. I had to take my dog to the vet. They now have like a push button mocha machine. I'm like, it's everywhere you go. And so
Yes,
it's really unfortunate.
The most ridiculous thing, we were putting together a new desk, and in the instructions on the first page, it's like, you're going to need a screwdriver and maybe some snacks and a picture of a big pretzel.
It's, and if you watch human behavior, people have completely stopped questioning whether what they are getting fed is okay. And what I mean by that, go to a restaurant, and if you sit down, as soon as the bread's put out, everybody's grabbing. Get on an airplane. People don't look at the ingredients. Whatever's being handed out, people will eat it. People have stopped associating what I put in my mouth matters, And I think, and in part of that, it's just because we've given them such terrible advice. If they've tried to lose weight, it probably hasn't worked. I'm definitely not blaming the patient. We've also created these ultra processed foods that can override our own brain chemistry. But yeah, my message to people would certainly just be like, you can literally change your life by, having a low carbohydrate diet, focusing it, I'm a big advocate for animal-based eating, focusing it on meats, saturated fats, and then small amounts of carbohydrates to tolerance. Like that can change your life in a very short period of time. But most dietitians, most doctors, all of society, not all, but most of society will tell you that that's nuts, and we don't do that with any other condition, and a lot of people don't even believe, like in addiction, people don't believe you could actually literally be addicted to sugar or carbohydrates. And I've seen it over and over in hospital setting. Nobody wants to be massively obese, so it's just really unfortunate. I think we have to, ideally, as doctors and dietitians, we would change our thinking. We would say, this isn't working. This hasn't worked in 20 plus years. It is time to do something different. It is time to look at the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so what about we know the the benefits of a lower carbohydrate diet, carnivore diet, the typical ones, improving metabolic health. What are some unexpected benefits you gained from changing your way of eating?
I mean, the number one was anxiety. Like if you had told me, I wish when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, like if somebody had said, like, this is really going to change how your brain functions. And, I became just such a powerful advocate for mental health. Like, I think we are going to see in the next 10 years, at least it's my hope, but we actually have clinical trials underway right now on mental health and keto. So I think we're going to finally start seeing that. So that was a big one, which is the reduction in anxiety, improved sleep. Like, I used to toss and turn a lot and wake up in the middle of the night, and I can just sleep through the night, which is really nice. Recovery from running, that was huge. I mean, I would do a workout or a really long run and just be wrecked, for the rest of the day. And now, I'm able to train. Like I can completely convinced I could not train for ultra marathons on a high carb diet. Like I can go and run. Probably the most I've done now is 28 miles one day and came back the next day and did 20. Like ran over a marathon and been able to do almost, so that's been really amazing. And just, I would say, an overall improved relationship with food. I'm not hungry every 2 hours. I'm able to eat, enjoy my food, and move on. I'm actually able to feel kind of like almost like appreciative and connected to it. There's this goofy dogma, or this, I know dogma is not the right word, that you can't love animals and eat them. But I mean, I have a deep respect for, animals, like literally giving its life for me. And I'm going to be eating a lot of it. We eat now all kinds of things. We had kidney, we've had tongue, cow tongue, had all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's improved my life a lot. And I've also been able to embrace it. I'm not embarrassed about it. I'm not, if we go out with some friends, their group of friends was like, did you literally bring butter to a restaurant? I'm like, yes, I brought a whole stick of butter. Like, back up. Like, I'm just embracing it. Like,
I do it too.
Yeah. And I'm okay to be weird. Like I've been weird my whole life. So maybe that's whatever. But I also, I'm so grateful. And like, when you just feel good, I'm just not overly worried about what anybody else thinks. Like I am very driven and determined with my running goals, with my advocacy goals. So it's like, yeah, if I got to be a little weird, yeah, so be it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, eating this way has made me completely not care about what anybody else thinks, because I'm like, look, I'm actually so much healthy now. There's nothing to argue about. There's, I'm doing so much better.
Well, and I think, people, it's very strange. Sometimes when you start doing better, it actually kind of makes people look at themselves and like, it can be uncomfortable for others around you. There's that saying that like misery loves company. And so it's very strange that sometimes even people who really care about you might try to bring you down. And it's not like they're even trying. They might even be subconsciously, So I always tell people to just be very strong in your resolve, and if people give me a hard time or even ask about it, I usually just have two talking points. I'll say, hey, as an athlete, this has worked really well for me. And man, you won't believe how much better my anxiety is. Because a lot of people can't relate to ultra running. They're like, most humans are stressed and anxious. So it's like, oh, wow, really? Your anxiety is better? Right. Interesting. And most people, would want to eat the steak and eat all those good foods. So I think, and I always say too, it's not my job to change anybody, convince anybody. And unfortunately, everybody has their own path and own journey. It's hard to see our friends, family, people we care about struggle, suffer, still drink sugary soda. But, I think you don't want to be like crazy and preachy. Like nobody likes those people. But I think just like living by example. And then whenever somebody's ready, if they ask you, just like, all right, tell me what you're doing. I feel like shit. Then you can kind of come in and talk to them. So that's always how I look at that situation.
Yes. Well, Michelle, this has been such a lovely conversation. I'm so privileged to have you on the show today. I have one more question for you. What is a piece of advice you would give to someone just starting out on a carnivore journey, or something you wish you knew when you just got started?
First thing that like immediately came to my mind was electrolytes. Just 'cause I had
Okay.
like such a bad headache. No, I mean, yes, that is one thing I would say is definitely make sure you're taking electrolytes, just because, you know, what happens when you go very low carb, especially if you've been very high carb, is your body is just released. Your insulin is going to be lower, which is ultimately is a really good thing. But then you're going to be flushing out a lot of electrolytes. A lot of people notice they have to pee a lot when they first start like a lower carb diet. So yes, that is. But
Mhm.
also I would say like get really sold. You know, unfortunately, we live in a society where I use the term when I talk with clients, that people want to game the system. And what I mean about that is, as opposed to like trusting the process, we are constantly trying to fix it, change it to make it feel better for us. So, you know, when I decided to go carnivore, I was going to go carnivore. I wasn't going to go carnivore until noon and then have cake, you know? So being really
Mhm.
set on like, I want to do this and have your reason, you know, not because my mom's pressuring me or, you know, I need to fit into that bikini, but like something that really deeply resonates for you. Because like I said in the beginning of this, like I was not a nice person. I was in pain. So I was like, I want to be better. Like I'm going to try this. And so I was so sold on it that I was not gaming it. I was not going to say like, okay, well, I'm just going to have this salad at night. You know, it's like, I'm going to really do this. So, and really do it for 30 days. You have nothing to lose. You know, you have absolutely nothing to lose. And of course, you know, I should probably disclaim, certainly if you're on any blood sugar lowering medications or whatever, you should check with your doctor. But like, really get sold, do it for 30 days, take electrolytes, and just watch your life change. Like I almost, it kind of felt exciting to me. Like, oh my God, like 30 days, like I could, things could be better. And they were so much better. And they keep getting better.
Yeah, that's, I can agree with that. It just keeps getting better. Like as soon as I'm like, yeah, this is really nice, and it's like, oh, it's a little bit better even still.
Yeah. And you know, you grow, you learn, you change, like you know, life might adapt. Like obviously, you know, I different as like as a runner, but the
Mhm.
foundation for me, I believe will always be the same. Like I can't imagine ever going back to how I ate, just because my physical and mental health is just so much better.
Absolutely. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for meeting me with me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me on, and I hope you enjoy the book.
Yes, yeah, I eat books like this up. Like I
Good.
absolutely devour them. So yes, I'm enjoying it. I think I've got about 20 pages left. It's a
Oh,
good one.
awesome. Good. Thank you.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day and stay meaty. Run a
You too.
mile for me.
I will. I will. Have a good one.
All right, bye-bye.
That's it for today. Until next time, stay meaty, stay strong, stay inspired. Do you have a carnivore story to tell? Connect with me on Instagram at meet, MEAT, Mrs. MRS Grubs, GRUBS. Or you can email me at carnivorestories@gmail.com. I would love to interview you, and the world needs to know that meat heals.